Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well. In this video I'll be talking about writing and types a little more. Recently I made a video about INFPs, INFJs and styles of writing, content of the, of the creative process, of the creative production. And some people seem to have liked it, I guess. So, in the video I had said that I would take advantage in a future recording to tackle other types of types. That's kind of not good. In relation to writing and content of the creative production. So I discussed INFPs and INFJs. Maybe I will be sporadically returning to those two types. Maybe I'll give a very quick summary of what were my insights from the previous video, but my essential purpose in this new video is to talk a bit more about INTP and INTJ styles of writing, with the proviso that actually I don't think I am as much to be trusted as gospel as I would be in the case of INFPs or INFJs. Not that I would be in those cases, but I would trust myself a little more. I think, when it comes to INTP writers and INTJ writers, they're really not the kind of person I am. I mean, I'm a feeler myself, despite some rumors that I might not be. I know I am. I see a cute baby animal of any type, I nearly explode, so that indicates something, I think. But so yeah, I mean, I know INTPs a bit. I used to think I was one. I know INTJs a bit. I used to think I was one too before I came around to INFJness. So hopefully I'll have interesting things to say. So if you remember, in the case of INFPs, what I was saying is that in relation to the three main functions of INFPs, I will not be talking much about the inferior function. Maybe they take a role in the process of writing, maybe, but I have to assume that the inferior function is not the sort of predominant contributor and agency in that process. So to me, it's kind of fine to focus on the dominant function and the auxiliary function as well as the tertiary function, because in the case of a lot of at least really good writers, really great writers, the tertiary function seems to me to be quite well developed and exploited to reap the largest possible benefits for the sake of the writing. So in the case of INFPs, I was talking about how a lot of INFP writers, such as Proust, such as Shakespeare, Edgar Poe, and so many others, tend to have a lot of great emotional depth, versatility of subject matter and description of scenes, as well as a very vast wealth of detail that they add to stories, thanks to SI. The versatility coming mainly from NE, and the emotional depth coming mainly from FI. Obviously, always interacting with one another. In the case of INFJs, you have the vision with NI, you have the ability to universalize a theme with FE, and the ability to, I guess, come up with a way to present the vision that can be quite original, quite experimental sometimes with TI. You can really see that, for example, in James Joyce or in Faulkner. I think that in James Joyce and Faulkner, you see a lot of experimentation, a lot of stream of consciousness, a lot of unusual prose, more often than in INFPs. The innovative writing is more striking in INFJ writers a lot of the time than in INFP writers. And I think that's because of NI, the sort of unique vision that they have, and also the TI sort of tertiary promoting experimentation, and then universalization of the different themes with FE. The downside being that often there's not as much, well, it's not a downside, it's just a different kind of interaction, but you wouldn't tend to see as much detail as you might see in an INFP writers in terms of description of emotions, as well inner states. I mean, as well as the descriptions of actual scenes taking place, and the versatility within a single book. The versatility, I think, of description is a little bit less nimble than in the case of INFP writers. But also INTP writers, because INTP writers have in common with INFP writers that they use ANI. And this provides me with a good bridge to move on to the discussion of INTP writers. Maybe we can start with INTPs and after that INTJs. So in order to appreciate what INTP writers can bring to the table, again, it's useful to try to think about their function stack. Before maybe jumping straight into the function stack of INTPs, just a note, I mean, like, when we as people think about INTPs, we don't necessarily think, first of all, oh, like creative types, writers. Creative types, yes, but maybe not writers. But in fact, there are quite a lot of INTP writers, and INTP artists, people who work in cinema. I mean, I keep hearing that Christopher Nolan, like one of the really strong, good directors of our times, I keep hearing is INTP. Stephen King is most likely one as well. And also, a writer who is like easily in my top 5 favorite writers ever is Borges. Again, I'm murdering his name. You know, he's the Argentinian writer, 20th century, who wrote fictions, the collection of short stories fiction, The Book of Sand, and a third one, and I should remember, Aleph and Other Stories. So these are the 3 main collections of short stories that Borges is known for. And I will be using his example mostly to discuss INTP writers. So you see that the sample is a bit more limited. I was able to mention and draw on like a higher number of INFP examples. I mentioned Kafka, I mentioned Shakespeare, I mentioned Poe, I mentioned blah, blah, blah. In the case of INFJ writers, I mentioned mostly 3, Faulkner, Hess, and Dostoevsky. And earlier on in this very video, I mentioned Joyce. So samples that are not massive, but enough to start having, the sort of shadow of a pattern going on, which may or may not illustrate what I'm trying to push forward here. In the case of INTP writers, unfortunately, I'll be sort of contenting myself with Borges. But listen, again, it's a combination of my insights, function stacks of INTPs, and my experience reading him. So what can we say based on maybe Borges's style, his way of writing, his interests, in relation to the INTP stack, function stack, and the fact that it has in common a little bit with the INFP stack and also with the INFJ stack? I think when it comes to creative writing, obviously the INFP style is very much its own style. It cannot be said to be a mix of INFJ and INFP. It makes no sense. I mean, but I think that if we could start comparing INFP and INTP styles, it could be a good start, because obviously the two types share their auxiliary function, which is extroverted intuition, NE, and their tertiary function, which is introverted sensing, in common. So what it means is that quite naturally the INTP writers are going to be just as good at nimbly switching between subject matters and different scenes and stuff, and also at just having a lot of ability for facts, description, remembering stuff, adding a lot of detail to the stories. And you really see that in Borges. You see that he is able to give an incredible wealth of detail to the slightest scene. It's really insane. And what he talks about can be the library of Babel, which is this idea of this conceptual library that contains all the books in the world. He talks about a garden of forking paths, which is this kind of incredible garden where like paths keep forking. He has I can't remember the title, but he has like a short story about this painting where you see tigers and they're moving inside like the room of a hotel, which obsesses the main character of the story. You have a short story that's about a man whose memory of everything, whose faculty of memory is so sharp that it like debilitates him, because every time he remembers a fact, it's like a knife goes through his mind, because it's like so photographic, so sharp. He relives it. It prevents him from living in the moment. So there's always like a lot of philosophical depth to what Borges writes. But as you can see, like, it's very diverse. It's loosely connected. Everything is loosely connected. Interestingly, he chooses the short story rather than a long book, and explores. He has this like loose theme, experimental, which I think is mostly driven by TI, just wanting to explore lots of conceptual different things, and then populating these conceptual ideas with characters and scenes, and adding a wealth of detail to both. So we have like the conceptual approach in the INTP writers seems to be dominant. I do not sense there is like a vision, a very underlying and unified vision, as there seems to be in writers like Joyce, Dostoevsky, etc. It's not so much a vision as a movement towards embracing certain concepts and looking at them from different perspectives, different scenes, different characters, and a great wealth of detail, and a lot of analytical and philosophical depth. There is not as much, like maybe expectedly, there's not as much exploration of characters' feelings and emotions in INTP writers from my experience. In Borges, like, there is a bit, but it's mostly via a sense of nostalgia, which is very philosophically explored. There's very, very few women, so like men and women relationships, I mean, they are like part of the core stuff of like the feeling side, if you like. If you don't have that in a book, I mean, that could be limiting, because he's not limiting, but just not included. So he's not exploring that kind of side of the characters. And his characters, often you don't know that much about them, and they are a little bit kind of a pawn in his concepts. Some of them are extremely interesting, but it's rare that you know a wealth of detail about their life. You know a wealth of detail about what they do, about their interests. Like, sometimes he would just talk about a particular encyclopedia, which he partly draws from realities, an encyclopedia that like is of this like Icelandic writer, and he refers to a particular character and some mythology, which is then like found in a volume that probably invents, and he goes into an unbelievable amount of detail, links it to a wider philosophy, has very experimental dialogues, and that is, to me, the essence of the INTP writer, as I've experienced him. Experimental, conceptual, philosophically profound, but more from a thinker's perspective, great wealth of detail, lots of detailed stories, not as much of a unified vision, and not as much as of emotional exploration. There's only one remaining, the INTJ writer. I'll try to be a bit quick because I've been blah-blahing for a long time already. So what can I say about the INTJ writer? Well, let me try to think. Who do I know who's an INTJ writer? I know Nietzsche, but I would like to cover him more in the philosophy section. I know about Sartre. Maybe I could talk about Sartre, because although he's a philosopher, he also very much published works of fiction. I think it's funny because the INTJ writer often can seem a bit like an INFP writer at first. And this is not so surprising, given that INTJ writers often tend to be like relatively strong on their tertiary FI. The function stack of the INTJ, not counting the inferior function, is NITSI, FI. So the INTJ writer, and you see that in Sartre again, there's no SI, so not a lot of interest paid to description. So you find that very much as a kind of model in the INFJ writer, obviously, because the middle functions, auxiliary, no, actually, that's not true. The but let's say that like the INFJ writer and the INTJ writer have in common that they do not have SI. Okay, that's what I wanted to say that. Their middle functions are not the same, but they do not have SI, neither of them. And so because of that absence, you kind of see that like big long descriptions, unbelievable amount of emotional detail as in the case of INFPs, or in descriptions, unbelievable amount of like descriptive or conceptual detail as in the case of INTPs via tertiary SI. So it's not really there in INTJ writers. If I use the example of Sartre, although I'd have to read Thomas Mann, I want to read him after Hess, and I read that he's an INTJ writer, so maybe I could be contradicted, because The Magic Mountain is a very long book, and I can't imagine that there is not a lot of detail. But anyway, this is how I kind of see it in the case of an INTJ writer, and the example of Sartre would confirm that somewhat. It looks like the INFP writer because FI is quite pronounced, which makes sense because, you know, literature is really a field where you can get to explore a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, and write about them and develop them, unpack them. So often INTJ writers tend to have a well-developed FI, which is nice. Just in the same way that often INFJ writers have well-developed TI, like Joyce and Faulkner. And INFP and INTP writers have well-developed SI, as I illustrated. So often the FI is quite developed, so a lot of the time the INTJ writer is interested in talking about like morality, you know, stuff that has to do with like the human relationship with meaning, morality, just sense in general, you know, kind of more feelers themes, because it's not always easy to see in what sense the TE of INTJs or INTJ writers comes out, is visible. Like Sartre, for instance, like he's seen as an INTJ, but it's also based on the life that he led and what he did in his own like life according to his biography. But in his writing, like, yeah, I mean, like you could say that he's more of a T user than a TI user, because a lot of the time what the individual has to face, for example, in his existentialism, what the individual has to face, you know, is like the external world. And I think that's where the TE is developed. And the external world is like acting with a form of pressure on the character. And the character ought at all times to remain authentic to himself. And Sartre gives sort of like a concepts of how to keep that FI-related authenticity cultivated as much as possible. So he does it in his philosophy, but in his writing, his novels, his plays as well, they are sort of obsessed, guided by the same ideas. The external world trying to fit people in a certain way, and people being invited by him to cultivate their, like what he calls their radical freedom, their freedom of always choosing, always having choice, always maintaining their freedom. When he says freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, what you do is FI, what's been done to you is TE. And now for the NI, I mean, basically the whole time, whenever Sartre writes a book, all his books, and I'm talking about books of fiction, they are just illustrations of different branches of his core vision, which is the vision of the radical freedom, of the cultivation of the absolute possibility of the individual to choose at all times what he wants to do, but also the confrontation with the anxiety of freedom and the contemplation of nothingness, which is right next to freedom, always lying in front of the individual for him to sort of choose, embrace, make his own. And every time the NI vision, overarching vision, is there. Like an INFJ writer and an INTJ writer equally, don't expect them to write to have 15 books that are widely varied about a lot of different things that don't seem connected at first, like in the case of INFP writers and INTP writers. They will always be in some way or other about their vision. It never fails. Okay guys, it's been a long video, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and next time I'll be talking about type and philosophers. See ya!